In the winter of 1875, the wind scratched across the Wyoming plains like a broken violin string. Maeve Callahan had nothing left. No husband, no money, just two hollow-bellied children, and a cabin that groaned with every gust, held up by rusted nails and borrowed prayers. That night, the snow didn't fall quiet. It delivered something. A man, bleeding, frozen, half dead. He collapsed on her doorstep without a name, a past, or permission. Maeve didn't ask who he was, didn't care where he'd been. She just opened the door. She thought she was saving a life, but she was welcoming a storm, one that would bury old grief, unearth buried truths, and change the fate of her family forever. Maeve Callahan hadn't spoken to another adult in 33 days. Not since Everett Langston, the banker with a waxed mustache and a soul thinner than paper, tipped his hat like it was mercy and gave her until spring to pay the debt or pack her children and go. The cabin creaked with every gust, its floorboards swollen from last summer's rain. The stove coughed more than it warmed. Boone, just 8, had learned to split kindling like a man. Juniper, 10 going on 30, could skin a rabbit faster than her late father ever had. They lived quiet. No tears, no complaints. Just tasks, sunup to sundown. The kind of life where a woman didn't cry from loneliness. Not because it didn't ache, but because crying wasted water. And yet, each morning, as frost clung stubborn to the window glass, Maeve found herself staring down the empty road, as if expecting something, someone, other than sorrow and snow. She remembered when that road used to bring laughter. 3 winters ago, Henry Callahan had ridden down that same path with a sack of flour slung across his back and a wildflower tucked in his coat. He was never a rich man, never a soft one either, but he had loved fiercely. When wolves came too close or the creek overran the field, Henry stood between his family and the world like he was carved from granite. The last day he returned, blood on his shirt, a bullet high in the chest, still smiling, still joking. "It's just a graze," he'd said. But it wasn't. He'd died before moonrise, holding her hand in the dark, breath thin, eyes not quite afraid, just sad, not for himself, for her. Maeve buried him alone beneath the cottonwood tree out back. Juniper had watched from the porch, holding Boone, too young to know why Mama wouldn't speak for 3 days straight. She'd never looked at that tree the same way again. Now, as snow piled at the windowsills and Langston's debt hung like a storm cloud over the roof, Maeve moved through her days with the numbness of survival, not quite living, but not yet ready to stop. And still, each dawn, she stared out that window, not hoping, not exactly, just remembering how it used to feel. Juniper saw him first. She'd gone to check the snares by the tree line, barefoot in her brother's old boots, scarf flapping behind her like a prairie flag stitched by wind. It was supposed to be a quick errand. One of the rabbits had been limping. She was hoping for meat. But when she came running back, cheeks flushed, eyes too wide, Maeve felt something twist behind her ribs. "Mama," Juniper whispered, breath ragged, "there's a man out there. He's hurt bad." Maeve didn't speak. She didn't need to. She grabbed the rifle from above the hearth, loaded out of habit, and stepped into the cold. Her boots crunched through ice as she followed Juniper behind the barn, past the broken fence where wild grass still poked through frozen dirt. The wind bit at her face. Snow drifted sideways like dust from some invisible gallop, And then red, a spray across white, dried, cracked, a trail of blood winding like a wounded snake toward the cottonwood stump at the edge of the field. Someone had crawled, far, desperate, and there, half buried, coat torn, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath him, was a man. He looked carved from stone, gaunt, dirty, shoulders soaked through with blood, lips blue like river ice, breath barely lifting the snow around his mouth. A revolver rested in its holster, untouched, as if death itself hadn't dared to claim it yet. Maeve froze. She'd seen men like this before, wounded, hunted, used up by something cruel, but this one felt different, not just injured, discarded. She raised the rifle slightly, steadying it toward his chest. Then she saw his hand twitch, just once, and something ancient stirred in her, not pity, not fear, something closer to memory. Years ago, Henry had staggered up this same path, bleeding, but he'd had a name, a wedding ring, a reason to fight. This man had none of those, and yet she couldn't walk away. Maeve lowered the rifle. Her breath steamed in the air. She knelt in the snow beside the stranger, palms pressed into the icy crust. Fingers numb, she began to dig. Not because she trusted him, not because she owed him, but because no soul, no matter how broken, deserved to die alone in the cold. They dragged him in on a quilt too thin for the cold. The fabric snagged on the threshold as Boone held the door open, his small hands white-knuckled against the push of the wind. The boy's face was pale but set, like he knew this was no longer about chores or wood stacks. Juniper guided the man's legs with a quiet fierceness, her brow furrowed like she was 30, not 10. It wasn't the first time she'd helped her mother move dead weight, but it was the first time the weight was still breathing. They laid him near the hearth. The fire hissed low, flickering over his bloodied shoulder and onto the wood floor that once held Henry's boots. Maeve cut away his coat with shaken hands. The fabric stuck. The blood had dried in places. Her breath caught. A bullet, high on the chest, close to the heart. Too familiar, too cruel. Her hands froze. For a moment, the fire faded. All she saw was Henry, lying on the same floor, eyes wide open, a different bullet, but the same color of blood. He'd told her not to cry, told her to be strong for the kids. "I'm not afraid to die," Henry had whispered, "but I hate leaving you in a world that don't give a damn." The memory hit like a mule's back kick. Maeve blinked, forced herself back into the now. 2 children were watching. Their world was made of how she reacted to things. So she didn't flinch. She boiled water, ground the last of her herbs, comfrey and yarrow, the ones Henry used to grow in that patch out back, before the frost claimed the roots. Her fingers found needle and thread meant for mending Boone's coat, not someone's torn flesh. The man didn't wake, didn't flinch, not even when the needle dug deep. He bore the pain like it was something he'd paid for already. Boone watched from the edge of the table, arms hugging his knees. Juniper stood with a towel in her hand, wordless but ready. When it was done, Maeve sat back on her heels. Blood stained her apron. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but the suddenness of what she'd just done. She hadn't sewn anything in months. Now she'd sewn a man back together. "He gonna die?" Boone asked, his voice thin, barely there. Maeve looked at the stranger's face, sharp, hollow, weather-worn. "I don't know," she said softly, "but he's not dying out there." And that was the first promise she'd made aloud since Henry went cold in her arms. The cabin was quiet, but not still. The kind of silence that creaks, Wind clawed at the shutters like it had a grudge to settle. The fire snapped weakly, tired from burning too long on too little wood. And on the floor, Wade Remington fought shadows only he could see. Maeve had moved the children into her own bed, just like the nights Henry used to come back from the mine, sore and broken. She pulled the curtain shut, tucked Juniper beneath quilts, and told Boone not to be scared if Mama stayed up. She sat by the hearth, mending an old sock for the third time, not because it needed it, but because her hands didn't know how to rest anymore. But her eyes never left him. He stirred, once, then again. A low groan slipped from between cracked lips. His head jerked sideways, hands clenching tight, like they were still gripping reins, or maybe holding on to something slipping away. "Margaret," he rasped. "Forgive me." Maeve's needle paused mid-air. She'd heard that name before, not in person, but in letters, songs, gravestones, a name full of softness, a name you whispered only when no one else was listening. Another murmur, this time clearer. "They took it, all of it, Double H. Gone." Maeve blinked, her breath caught without her permission. A ranch, a woman, a life? Gone. His face was drenched with sweat, but it wasn't the fever that twisted his jaw shut, that made his mouth clamp down on words unspoken. This wasn't a man who'd gotten lost. This was a man being erased. She leaned closer, unsure why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the sound of his voice, low and hoarse, but full of something you don't fake in dreams, regret. Wade twitched again. His hand moved, like he was reaching for something, or someone, he couldn't touch anymore. Maeve gently pulled the blanket higher, up to his chin. A simple gesture, one Henry used to call proof you still believe in people. She stared into the fire. She'd seen plenty of men run from war, from the law, from the kind of guilt that sticks to the inside of your ribs. But this one, he didn't feel like someone running. He felt like someone who had already lost the race and was waiting to be buried. And for reasons she didn't fully understand, it didn't make her afraid. It made her stay. He woke with the sun creeping through the frost-streaked window, not with a gasp, not with a groan, but like a man trained not to startle, like someone used to waking in strange places and needing 3 heartbeats to know if he should run, fight, or pretend he was still dying. Maeve was at the stove, spooning cornmeal into a battered iron pot, when she felt it. That stillness, that change in the room when someone starts watching you, not out of curiosity, but calculation. She turned slowly. He was upright, propped against the wall, blanket bunched around his waist, face gaunt, shoulder bandaged, eyes open. And not just open, aware. Those eyes weren't the soft kind, not blue like clear sky, not gray like ash. They were the color of a thunderstorm about to break loose on the prairie. Eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. And they didn't just look at her. They measured her. "Morning," Maeve said, voice calm like water not yet boiling. He nodded once. His gaze slid to the fire, then the ceiling, then the pot. All was moving, like a man who couldn't afford to let anything surprise him. "Where am I?" 2 miles west of Cedar Creek, she answered, and about half a breath from the grave. He almost smiled. Almost. Behind the curtain, Boone peeked out, gripping his wooden horse like a rifle. Juniper stood near the hearth, stiff, eyes darting between the stranger and her mother. The man's voice came low, polite, with a faint southern bend, just enough to carry the drawl of heat and old regrets. didn't mean to bring trouble." Maeve stirred the pot, not looking up. "Trouble's been here longer than you." There was a long pause. The fire crackled. Then, "Name's Wade," he said. "Wade Remington." Maeve didn't blink, didn't nod right away either. She let the name settle, roll around her memory like a stone in a pan, listening for the sound of gold. But it didn't ring true, not false either, just unfinished. "I'm Maeve," she said at last, "and these two are mine." Wade's eyes flicked toward the children, not with the discomfort of a man who didn't like kids, but with the weary caution of someone who once held little hands and never got to again. There was something in the way he sat, too upright for someone who should still be fevered, too alert for someone that close to death, not just a cowboy, not just a stranger, something more, or maybe something less. He noticed the pot then, the smell of cornmeal and a pinch of dried rosemary. His eyes didn't soften, but the tension in his jaw eased. Maeve didn't know why she did it, but she ladled an extra scoop into a second bowl. She set it beside him without a word. He looked at the food, then at her, and, for a breathless second, the space between suspicion and gratitude held thin as spider silk, fragile as trust. It was 2 days later when the knock came. Not the kind neighbors make, not tentative, not polite. It was the kind of knock that owns the wood it hits, sharp, sure, and twice as loud as it needs to be. Maeve stood in the kitchen, hands damp from shelling beans. Her back stiffened before her head even turned. Some knocks don't ask permission. They demand answers. She opened the door slow. The wind slithered in first, followed by a man in a dark coat and cleaner boots than any soul had business wearing this far from town. Frost clung to the leather like it was afraid of him, too. Everett Langston, the bank's man. He wore a smile too polished to be real, cut from the same cloth as courthouse lies and backroom deals. "Miss Callahan," he drawled, eyes flicking past her, scanning the room like he owned the deed to her kitchen air. Didn't expect company this far out. Maeve didn't offer greeting, didn't step aside, just kept one hand on the doorframe. Behind her, Wade sat near the fire, shirt on, bandages neat, his face unreadable, but his eyes, they sharpened. Juniper moved closer to Boone, fingers silently finding his. "I told you I'd come by before the thaw," Langston said, stepping forward uninvited, boots grinding frost into her floorboards. "Just checking in. The debt still stands." "I haven't forgotten," Maeve said. Her voice was even, but there was a hitch just behind the last syllable. Langston smiled wider, like a snake uncoiling. "No, ma'am, but memory don't change numbers. Spring's comin'. You either pay in coin or in land." Then, without breaking eye contact, he slipped off his gloves. Not for warmth, not for manners. It was a move Maeve had seen before, unwrapping a threat. Wade didn't move, but the air shifted. Something colder than the wind crept into the cabin. Langston's eyes finally landed on him. He paused, looked once, twice. That smile? Gone. "Friend of the family?" he asked, tone tightening. Maeve didn't answer, didn't blink. Langston's gaze lingered. He could smell things in a room. Power, weakness, blood. He slid his gloves back on, slow. "Well," he said, tipping his hat, "don't let me interrupt your hospitality." He turned, boots echoing like gavel strikes as he stepped off the porch. The buggy wheels cracked the icy path like breaking bones. The door shut with a quiet finality. No one moved. Then Wade's voice, low and certain. "That man aims to take this place." Maeve didn't look up. Her eyes were on the embers, watching one flake of ash float and die. "He doesn't need to aim," she murmured. "He just needs to wait." And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not fear, not yet, but the knowing. That winter wouldn't be their hardest season. They came just before dusk, 3 of them, riders painted black by distance, their silhouettes sharp against a sky bruised purple and gold. Dust clung to their coats, frost lined their saddlebags, and on each of their faces, intent. Maeve spotted them first. She was gathering kindling, apron full of broken twigs, when she felt it, a pull in her gut. She squinted westward and saw them, moving like men who didn't need to hurry, because fear usually made folks open doors fast enough. She didn't say a word, just turned, walked inside, and latched the door behind her. Wade was at the hearth, mending a boot with a bent nail and stubborn hands. He didn't lift his head, but his fingers stopped. "They're not from here," Juniper whispered, her voice thin, peeking through the curtain. Maeve nodded once. "Keep Boone inside, both of you. Do not open this door unless you hear my voice." She grabbed her shotgun from behind the door and stepped onto the porch. The air outside had turned brittle, the kind of cold that cracks lips and makes boots stiff. The lead rider was already swinging down, thin as a rail, scar under his eye, silver tooth flashing like it belonged to the devil's dentist. "Evening, ma'am," he said. His voice oozed charm, fake and sharp around the edges. "Looking for someone?" Maeve didn't return the smile. "Most folks round here prefer being found by invitation." That made the second man chuckle, low, dry. The third didn't move, just watched. His eyes were empty as spent shells. "We're hunting a man," Scarface said. "Tall, might be limpin', name of Wade Remington." Maeve felt her heart slam against her ribs, once, twice, but her face still as stone. "Ain't seen no one like that." Scarface tilted his head. "You sure? One of the boys up at Barlow's place said he might have come this direction. Thought it was mighty curious. A widow living out here, getting a visitor right after the first thaw." Maeve folded her arms. "Maybe you ought to ask Barlow to mind his own damn fence." The second rider leaned forward. "Mind if we take a look around?" Maeve stepped off the porch. Her boots hit the frost-hard ground with a crunch that sounded louder than it was. "You want to step onto my land? You better bring more than questions," she said. "You better bring a judge's name on paper." A long pause, just wind, the whimper of pine trees, and behind the door, faintly, Boone's humming voice, off-key and innocent. Scarface narrowed his eyes. "Didn't peg you for the lion kind, ma'am." Maeve's stare never wavered. "Then you pegged wrong." Something in her voice made even the horses shift. Finally, Scarface spat sideways. "Ain't over." He turned, mounted. The others followed. They didn't ride away angry. They rode away thinking. And that was worse. Maeve didn't move until the last hoofbeat faded. She exhaled. Shoulders slumped, but not from fear, from holding too much in too long. She opened the door. Wade was already standing, still as a shadow. "You didn't have to lie," he said softly. Maeve looked at him, really looked, not at the wound, not the gun at his side, but at the man beneath all of it. "I didn't lie for you," she said, voice low, thick. "I lied for my children." A pause, then almost whispered, "But maybe also for myself." For the first time, Wade didn't look like a stranger. He looked like something unfinished that she might dare to finish. It was near midnight. The fire had shrunk to a dull glow, just embers and low crackles. Shadows danced up the walls like old ghosts trying to tell old stories. Maeve sat by the hearth, darning socks again, not because they needed it, but because silence, left unchecked, had a way of curling into the chest like smoke. Wade sat by the window, one arm in a sling, the other resting on the table, fingers curled as if they missed holding something, a glass, maybe a gun, or someone's hand as they slipped away. He hadn't said much since the riders came, but there was something in his stillness now, less guarded, more worn, not like a door opening, more like a lock rusting loose from the inside. "I had a ranch," he said, voice low, as if speaking louder might break it. "Double H, south of Red Mesa." Maeve didn't look up. Her needle dipped and rose, dipped again. 30 head of cattle, he continued, 2 hired hands, 1 woman. His voice cracked on the last part. "She planted lilacs," he said, "along the fence line. Said the prairie needed softness somewhere." The needle stopped. Maeve looked up. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat, pulled out something wrapped in a handkerchief soft from years of touch. He unwrapped it with the care of a man handling bones. A pocket watch, gold, engraved, MWR. He laid it on the table just between them, not pushing it toward her, not keeping it close, just placing it like an offering. Maeve stared. "Her name?" "Margaret," Wade whispered. And somehow, in that one word, the cabin grew quieter. "She died?" she asked. He nodded, not the nod of acceptance, but the kind that says, "I'm still there, in that moment, every day." "She wasn't the first thing I lost," he murmured, "but she was the last I ever tried to hold on to." Maeve wanted to speak, but all she had were worn words, too small for a wound that wide. So she didn't offer pity, didn't shift closer. She just looked at him, really looked. A man stitched together with grief and dust and stubborn breath. A man who'd once known softness and buried it with his bare hands. For a flicker of a second, her hand moved, reached slightly across the table. Not to take his, just to be closer. But she stopped. Because sometimes the only way not to scare a wounded animal is to let it come to you. It happened fast, like most things that change everything do. Boone had wandered outside, chasing the chicken with the crooked foot, the one he swore laid golden eggs when no one was looking. The sky had turned that hard winter gray, and the wind carried the sharp promise of more snow. Maeve was pulling on her coat, halfway through calling Juniper in for supper. Then came the scream, high, sharp, Boone's, and then, crack, a deep splintering sound that stole her breath. Maeve ran. Wade ran too, faster than a man with a torn shoulder and weeks-old fever ever should. By the time she reached the yard, the scene twisted her bones cold. Boone was halfway down the old well, arms scrambling, clutching at a rotten plank that was already cracking under him, legs kicking, boots scraping air. "Mama!" he cried, voice thin and breaking. Maeve dropped to her knees at the edge, reached, too far, too late. Then Wade moved, not cautiously, not calculating. He launched, barreled past her with the kind of strength only grief and instinct ever teach. He hit the snow hard, slid. One hand shot forward just as the plank snapped like a gunshot. Boone fell. Wade caught the boy's arm mid-drop. His other arm braced against the icy lip of the well. Teeth clenched. Blood burst from his wound, soaking through his shirt. But he didn't groan, didn't hesitate. "Hold on, kid," he growled through clenched teeth. "I got you." The well yawned below, black and ancient. Death lived down there. But Wade didn't let go. He grunted, muscles screamed, and with a heave that shook his entire frame, he pulled Boone free, rolled them both into the snow. Maeve was already there, hands on her boy, pulling him into her lap, breath catching, sobs too tangled to come out whole. Wade sat upright slowly, one arm wrapped around his ribs. His face was pale, sweat along his brow despite the cold. Juniper stood a few paces away, hand over her mouth, eyes wide with something new. Not fear, not shock, reverence. Wade looked at Boone, managed a crooked smile. "You okay, kid?" Boone didn't answer. He just flung his arms around Wade's neck. Small, fierce, like he belonged there. Maeve stared at the two of them, hands still trembling, heart pounding like a runaway horse. He hadn't asked to stay, hadn't promised anything, but in that moment, in that snow, in that silence after screaming, Wade Remington was no longer just the man they saved. He was the man who saved them right back. He was theirs. The thaw came slow that year. Snow didn't vanish. It retreated, flake by flake, like a prayer being answered by someone taking their time. The wind softened. The creek began to whisper again. The fields stretched like old men rising after a long sleep, muddy, stiff, but alive. And Wade stayed, not because anyone asked, not because he said he would. He just stayed. He fixed the south fence, where Henry's post-hole digger still leaned like it was waiting to be remembered. He patched the roof where the rain used to sneak in and whisper secrets to Maeve's sleepless nights. He helped Juniper build a new chicken coop. This one held. He laughed one evening, a real laugh, short, surprised. He blinked like he didn't recognize the sound coming from his own throat. Boone stopped calling him Sir, started saying Wade like it was a given, like he'd always been part of the story. Juniper still watched him sometimes, but not like a hawk, more like someone who wanted to remember a man's face because they finally trusted it. And Maeve, she stopped counting spoons, stopped locking the rifle cabinet. And each morning, without thinking, she poured 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for the man who stayed. One afternoon, she found him kneeling in a yard, fingers sunk in the thawing soil. "What are you planting?" she asked. He looked up, smiled. Not that tight, careful smile from before. A real one. "Lilacs," he said. "Margaret loved 'em." Maeve knelt beside him. Her hand brushed his. Rough, warm, familiar now. She had good taste. There was a pause, just the wind, light and forgiving. Then Wade looked at her, eyes steady, voice quiet. "I'm not running any more, Maeve." And somehow she believed him, not because he said it, but because he was still here to say it. Some men promise with words, but the best ones, they promise by staying. And in that thawed earth, between the lilacs, the laughter, and the lines on their faces, a new season had finally begun.